Joe Richardson, civil rights attorney at McHugh Law Group, getting into it once again, breaking it down, the law and common sense.
You've got a lot of things that are going on that are unseemly, that have to do with some physical harm. He's a domestic abuser, which he's not getting prosecuted for. He's a freaky guy, which he's not getting prosecuted for. So that is a very, very open question, and I think that the defense will take it directly and use that and ride that all the way to the closing argument. Now, that said, what you want to be able to say, if you're the prosecution, is that she is a victim and that she is doing things she would not be doing otherwise. He threatened with violence. He held things over her head. She was clearly doing things that she didn't want to do that were not voluntary. She talks about her first sexual experience, which was great, and that was fantastic. And then after that, she opens a Pandora's box she couldn't close, and these types of things. So they know what the risk is in terms of what they have to do to prosecute their case, and that the jury has to think a certain way about this. But if I'm the defense, of course, I'm asking the same question this person just asked. How is any of this criminal? It's crazy, it's freaky, might be morally wrong, but what makes it legally wrong?
So I think there's a couple of things here. And I think, one, transportation to engage in prostitution. We can't forget about that charge. If she's talking about being, Combs and his assistants, or her literally transporting sex workers for the purposes of sex work, and she's joining, that helps. That's that charge. If you talk about the idea of her transporting drugs to different locations, that could be one of the underlying predicate crimes for racketeering, right? Drug offenses. And then coercion, right? She hasn't gotten to the alleged violence yet, which I think is going to be coming if you base it off of the opening statement. But if she's talking about him having financial control over her and, kind of pressuring her into these sexual episodes even after she got sick, or whether or not he was dismissive about her concerns over the performers wearing condoms, it's not as strong of coercion as you've seen in other sex trafficking cases, but perhaps it's the building blocks towards that. And that's the question. I was thinking about something, Joe, is if they keep saying to her and saying to Cassie, was this work? Was this work? Was engaging in these sexual episodes work? He's taking care of her financially. Is this forced labor one of the underlying crimes of racketeering?
I think that the prosecution, of course, can argue that it is forced labor, but they still have the square peg in the round hole problem. There's a lot of things that, there's 7 or 8 different things, each of which could be a potential predicate crime. But it still feels as if when you're doing RICO, you can take a bunch of stuff with racketeering, throw it in a bowl, mix it around, and it's almost like you don't pay as much attention to the crime itself, whether you're talking about the arson, whether you're talking about some of these other things. It's almost like they don't pay quite as much attention, and there's not quite as much proof or combing out, for lack of a better term, no pun intended, of the actual crime, unless versus if the crime was being prosecuted in and of itself. And so the question becomes, are the predicate crimes there? Yeah, you can take a couple of them and put them there, et cetera. But all the jury has to do, of course, is believe the testimony and be good with the testimony. Is it there by itself? A couple of them are there, but it's still RICO, and it feels a little bit different because even what you're talking about, Jesse, she was forced to do this and she's doing this and she's overworking these hours, etc. This is the first time a jury, these regular folks in their daily lives, have looked at facts like this and been asked to extract forced labor from it, if that's the ask. Wow. And so that's what the risk is, because it looks a little bit different because you're going under a RICO charge.
From a civil context, Joe, and this came up a lot in the civil suits that Diddy was facing, not every Jane Doe who filed a lawsuit against him could proceed anonymously. There is a balance of interest here. So first of all, you separate a criminal case where they don't necessarily want to testify. They might be subpoenaed to testify. Sure, there's a question if they're cooperating with the government, but they have less of a choice than somebody who has filed a lawsuit, has taken a proactive step to actually initiate litigation. So in that sense, if you're going to file a lawsuit against Sean Combs, you're putting your case in the spotlight. He has a right to know who his accuser is. You started this. You might have, unless you can demonstrate there is a significant risk to your safety or reputation from you revealing yourself, the burden almost seems on the plaintiff in that case to prove that they need to be anonymous. It feels different in a criminal case. It feels that unless they say, hey, listen, I'm choosing, which is what Cassie did, I'm choosing to reveal my identity, they may have more of protection from being having their identities revealed.
Yeah, someone that's not involved in a proceeding voluntarily, right? Someone that's been subpoenaed to testify, et cetera, and there's a demonstrable fear for safety that is legitimate. It's still balanced against the fact that Diddy, in this case, has the right to face his accusers, et cetera. He's not supposed to be in a situation where we don't know who Jane Doe is, and Jane Doe is lobbing shots from behind the veil, as it were. I think it is a different standard in civil versus criminal. Civil case, it's a lot harder for you. I'm suing Diddy, and I want to be anonymous too at the same time. That's going to be much, much harder because you're bringing yourself into that area and bringing that on. But if it's a criminal case where, for oversimplifying it, safety is in question, right? This is one of the reasons that Diddy is being prosecuted. I think a judge, when doing the balancing, is going to be a little bit more likely to allow, and it's not likely, it's still in exceptional circumstances, it's going to be a little bit more likely to allow someone to be anonymous under circumstances like this, particularly given the nature of the case.
Joe, got a question here from Rel. Do you think it's dangerous for the government to be able to judge relationships? See, that's a good question, because a lot of people are criticizing or may criticize the prosecution's case and say, this is not the garden variety sex trafficking case that we've seen in like Taken, right? Where you got this organization that's kidnapping girls, shipping them off for sex work for clients, for profit, they're drugging them. It's different. It's taking a relationship and saying aspects of this relationship were sex trafficking. And you have to, the defendant has to be in a position to have the wealth, the resources, the power, the ability to do this. So not everybody can be charged with sex trafficking, but it is a fair question. Do you think it's dangerous for the government to be able to judge relationships?
I would say it is a fair question. And even if it wasn't a fair question, I'd say it's a real question. The whole idea that this is somebody in relationships that, to some people's view, may be being voluntarily participated in. Do we actually get to say, 20,000 foot view, that every time P. Diddy Combs is in a relationship with someone who's probably got less money, who's probably got less resources, who's probably less well known, that there is this power dynamic that makes what goes on that might be voluntary in another relationship, criminal activity in this relationship? So it does raise some larger questions that I think that we have to deal with regardless of how this thing comes out. That being said, prosecutors, government, in this particular case, it's the U.S. government. Prosecutors have to deal with, we're officers of the court. You have to deal with the responsibility of bringing cases that are supposed to be on behalf of the people related to the administration of justice, doing justice, et cetera. And so that responsibility is put in their hands. Going back to go forward, legislators have the responsibility to figure out what the laws actually are. And RICO got passed, right? So that this could be a potential way for things to happen and people to be prosecuted. But the best question, I think, which is next door to that question, is, was RICO meant for a situation like this in the first place? And that's where we got to get to. And I think that's the discussion you have to have.
Joe, could Diddy still get a plea deal? How much time? It's very different from talking about a plea deal before trial starts. Very different talking about a plea deal after multiple witnesses, including the star witness Cassie, and now we're in the middle of the testimony of Jane. You think a plea deal would still be on the table?
They could do a deal all the way up to deliberation, but the point would be, why would the government offer him a deal now? Well, actually, better question is, why would he take one, right? If I'm him and I'm already fighting for my life, and that there's already been plea deal discussions, and I am certain that they were looking for a double-digit prison sentence, 85% of which he would do because he's in federal. So there's kind of nothing to talk about. So unless that got a whole lot better, I don't know why he does it. I mean, as it pertains to the charges themselves, I think the transportation is the quote easiest, for lack of a better term. But the question becomes whether the jury takes all of that and gets rid of the whole kit and caboodle. I think it's a little bit of an all or nothing proposition. And standing back, the government doesn't save face unless they get him to take a double-digit sentence. He's not going to take a double-digit sentence. So even though theoretically a deal could happen, I don't know that it happens because the sides would be too far apart, and they were too far apart in the first place. On the state side, they're a little bit easier because somebody can do half, and get out. Somebody can get probation and get out, those types of things. I just don't see that happening because everybody's too ground in. So it could happen, but I don't expect it.
Prosecutor asks Jane, what do you mean? I was repulsed by him. I tried for 30 minutes. Then I told Sean, can I talk to you in the bedroom? There, I told him I can't. I tried again, but no. I told Sean, I'm sorry. How did Sean respond? Agitated. Joe, is that enough?
No, not by itself. And to the point that's been made, they got to connect that agitation to something that takes her to a place where they're demonstrating that she's being forced to do something, that she's being coerced into doing something, right? The fact that he's agitated doesn't make him criminally liable in and of itself. I can be agitated too. We all get agitated, right? So how well do you connect the dots there, right? And to the point that was just made, I think it's a great point. This looks a little bit different than Cassie's testimony, right? There's some things that you can extract from Cassie's testimony that show that she did not want to be there, okay? Even though she loved him, even though there are times that she did, and there are times she's taking one for the team and taking ups and downs and goods and bads. That video is very, very powerful. Yep. And if you don't have anything like this here, then it makes it a little bit harder to connect the dots. They're still on the road, but it's difficult.
No, I think after that video, the jury could say, I don't know how she really consented to anything. Did she really? Is she a traumatized victim who couldn't even appreciate what role she was in? I think that video, I did a sidebar that came out earlier in the week about how that video, that event, the circumstances surrounding that event, what flowed from that event could possibly prove every charge in this case. To prove racketeering, I thought profit was needed. Is it needed, or is it, hey, if our common goal was to benefit Sean Combs, and if he's benefited, we all benefit. Do you need profit?
No, not necessarily. I mean, RICO racketeering is engaging in a legal scheme. Your legal scheme could ultimately end up failing financially, or as someone equates success. So having profit, now could that help you prove that as you're dealing with the elements, as you're showing the criminal enterprise? You're showing that there's a lot of money at stake. You're showing this is why you're keeping things up, because you made $1 million when you did X or Y or Z. Could it potentially help you? Yes, but is it absolutely necessary? No, it's not. Because then what I would do if I'm criminal X, I just make sure my enterprise didn't make any money. And then that way I knew I couldn't be prosecuted for racketeering. So,
Joe, you think he'd get life in prison if he was convicted of racketeering?
I don't know. It's possible, but I just don't know that they would necessarily give him life. To your point, there's a maximum of life on that charge. On transportation, engagement, prostitution, there's a maximum of 10 years. So if he's prosecuted that, he gets a little bit less time. And the racketeering, we talked about maximum of life. Sex trafficking by force, maximum of life, but mandatory minimum of 15. So I think that he's well into the double-digit years if he is convicted on anything, right? Either because it's mandatory or because the judge can do it. I don't know that the judge absolutely gives him life. I think it's a little bit more likely to happen if he gets convicted of everything, however.